Hello, my love. Welcome to another episode of Blisstopia podcast. I am your host, Mercedes Castellani, and I'm so happy to be recording this episode today. Today we have Dr. Stefanie Gerke. Stefanie helps sensitive people who are people pleasers to do less of what they don't need to do and more of what they actually want to do to have more calm and ease in their lives. Today, we're going to talk about people pleasing tendencies, and we have an expert to talk and to go super deep in just that. Stefanie and I, we met kind of by coincidence. A client of her and a client of mine thought we should meet and have a good chat. And we met, we had a chat, we had a lovely connection. And now we decided to take that connection further and share this topic with you. Stefanie is an expert on the topic, so we're going to go really deep. So welcome, Stefanie, to the show. I'm super happy to spend this time with you and to have you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for your interest in this topic, which is so dear to my heart.
Yes. And I think many people in the Blisstopia community will benefit from this because I think many of us can recognize sometimes some of those people-pleasing tendencies. And I'm really looking forward to go in depth with you and understand why do we do that? Why do we behave in such a way? But let's start, if you want, by the very beginning. If you want to share your story with us and why did you decide to focus your work as a coach and work with people pleasers?
Yeah, well, we teach what we most need to learn, right? So for me, it was just a really natural development that I decided to go into this direction because it's what I most benefited from in my own journey. So I would always consider myself a recovering people pleaser. I was a really big people pleaser in my 20s and the beginning of my 30s, and even as a child already. And I, at some point in my 30s, I came very close to a burnout because I was stretching myself too thin. And I think many people listening will be able to recognize those tendencies in themselves, like not being able to say no to anything. I was always, if anyone asked me to do anything, I would always do it or make sure that I could fit it in somehow. I was working in academia. I had a very demanding job not in terms of like high velocity or anything, but like high demand in like intellectual, performance. And I was teaching at university and I was doing my PhD research writing, or trying to at least. And I had a boss who was very strict, but also like my intellectual idol. So I wanted to be like her, and all these things came together. I also had a side project with two friends of mine. We had a little company for art and architecture tours in Berlin, and so that was my kind of side hustle as well. So I never had any spare time. I never had any white space in my calendar. Everything was always so full, and not just with like appointments. I think there are people who have even more appointments than I had at the time, but so much pressure, which I felt, not even because people pressured me, but because I pressured myself to always show up, to always be there for everyone, to always deliver 150% in everything, to not just be a great university lecturer and a great researcher with doing a good PhD, but also having this entrepreneur side in me and wanting to be there with my friends and like have also the best experience possible in the side hustle as well. And the pressure was mine, but at some point I wasn't able anymore to really distance myself from any of it. And I really felt like I was in this hamster wheel, the proverbial one, which everyone kind of knows about. And I felt like I was juggling all these balls in the air. And if any ball dropped, it would be like a catastrophe for me. And that wasn't a good mental place to be in. And I was really struggling with myself, with all the circumstances, everything I had to do. And I was also, on top of that, in a relationship that was not good for me. And I know you know what I'm talking about. A relationship in which I had to give too much of myself to make it work. And you can call it a toxic relationship or a codependent tendency in myself. Like I'm not blaming him. I'm just reflecting on this relationship afterwards. And it was not a good relationship for me. I did not feel seen. I hid too much of myself. And so all this came together. And this was in 2017, actually. The summer of 2017, my contract at the university ended. My PhD was not finished because I never gave myself enough time for it, because the PhD was something like just for me, which it wasn't, but it felt like, this is my achievement, my thing. So I only spent like very, very little time actually carving out time for the PhD. And so it wasn't done yet. I was lost. I was so lost. Like, what do I do now? My relationship finally came to an end. I had tried to get out of that relationship previously, but it had never worked because manipulation, etc. And so that finally happened, and a dear relative of mine had a severe diagnosis. And actually, I think I say that elsewhere. I can say it here as well. It was my sister, and my sister had a severe diagnosis, and she lives in Canada. I live in Berlin, and so at the time, it seemed like a very, very good idea for me to get out of my life and to immerse myself into hers. And I think, on the surface, you could say, well, that was another people pleaser move, because I tried to help her through, her treatment and help her with her kids. But if you go a little deeper, you will understand that it was also a kind of lifeline for me to extract myself from my life and to go be with her for a little while. And with that distancing from everything that I had going on, I was able to see that I was really, really unwell, and that in order to be able to help her, I need to help myself as well. And she had at the time already discovered the benefits of meditation. And I know you will like to hear this. She had discovered the benefits of mindfulness meditation, also to deal with her own things, right? And she brought me along to one of those classes, and it was a wonderful teacher, and I'm very grateful to everything that he taught me. And his wife was actually a life coach, and she offered a free 1-hour discovery call. And I had, at that time, I had never actually been in touch with a life coach and had never really known what life coaching is. Because at the time in Germany, it wasn't that well known yet. It kind of blew up in the past couple of years, but nobody I knew was a coach back then. That kind of changed by now.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was like, okay, why not? She's offering this free call. I'm going to take it. And I spent 1 hour on the phone with her, and I don't think I ever cried that much in my life. So it was really like everything. I really needed it. And I really realized how much I needed it in that call. And so I signed up for a coaching program with her for 3 months. And those 3 months of working on myself, this was the very first time I had actually ever worked on myself. I had, always considered myself a very mentally sane and stable person. I know now that that's not reason for not working on yourself, because there's always stuff to discover and to see and I'm not talking about self-optimization. I'm just merely talking about like, how can I reflect on my life and on myself in a way that will make me feel comfortable in my own life? And well, those 3 months with that life coach really changed my life, I have to say, because they really, really brought me back to myself. I had kind of gotten lost somewhere. I had also really felt lost. Lost was a very good word for me at the time. I felt lost. I felt like I didn't know where my life would be going, who I was, who I wanted to be, like what I wanted to do, etc. All these things. I realized that the way I had been living did not align with, if you want to call it a purpose, or like, I would just say I did not feel at home in my own life. And so realizing that and working on that was so amazing for me. And I always say that it didn't, for me, coaching was never to go outside of my comfort zone. Like many coaches push you to, they say change only happens outside your comfort zone, etc. For me and for my clients, actually, it's much more about getting into a comfort zone. I did not feel comfortable in my own life. And so I really worked on achieving that. And one of the things that struck me most in that time when I was working with that coach on my own life was that I had gone down that route of the academic work. Yes, also because it was fun for me. I loved my studies. It was art history, by the way. I loved studying art history. I loved talking and thinking about art, etc. But it had become so much pressure and so much. I realized at some point that I did not want to spend my career with art, that it was much more gratifying for me to look at art, think about art, etc. in my own spare time, but not actually spend my career with it. And that was one of the things I realized in that coaching training. And I also realized that I had gone down that route because I thought that people expected that of me, because I thought that, my professor, she really liked me. She liked my master's, my master's paper, and somehow it seemed so fitting to continue down that route. But I didn't ever sit down and think about what really suits me. People seem to think that this suits me. Okay, so I will do it.
But what do I actually want?
Yeah,
Me, what do I want?
yeah. I did not know, and I didn't know how to access that information because I was so used to having my antennas out with other people, feeling what they expect, or guessing what they expect, because in the end, I can never know. In trying to intuit, what do other people need? And that's the main characteristic of a people pleaser. So I realized that I had been people pleasing a lot in the past couple of years, and that had gotten me into a really toxic relationship, into a career in which I was merely reacting and not being proactive. And that had drained all my energy. And so at some point, after a couple of months, I went back to Berlin. I realized I really love what coaching did for me and how it helped me. And I realized I think I would be really good at that. I think I really love that concept of coaching. I really am 100% sold on the purpose of coaching because I have felt it for myself. And so I really want to learn how to do that. I really want to learn how to do that. And that was so powerful for me at that moment, to come back to Berlin and to say, okay, guys, it was really cool, but things need to change. And I don't want this to sound like I wasn't enjoying what I was doing before. I really was. And I had fun teaching. I had fun with my friends and the art tours. It was a great time, but it just wasn't, I didn't feel connected to myself during that time. Not completely. Yes. That's all I can say about that. The minute I stepped into the coaching training, which I had found by following my intuition, there are so many coaching trainings, you need to find the one that suits you. And I had a very good feeling about this one. There was also a kind of interview process beforehand, and the interview had felt really, really good. It was an institute for coaching and mindfulness, so the mindfulness aspect was in there as well. And my coaching trainer is just amazing, Matthias. He's a great guy. So the minute I stepped into that coaching training institute, I felt like I was home. And that was such a new feeling for me. The group of people that I spent my time with there, some of them I'm still really, really good friends with. The atmosphere, the way people hold space for each other, and the way people talk to each other in that context was just so me. It was so me. So and yeah. So I was like, okay, I really want to do this. And then in that process of learning how to be a coach, you also develop, of course, a kind of niche or like an idea of who you want to and can work with. And for me at that point, it was pretty clear, like people who are in a similar situation that I had been in, because I got out of it, and I know I can empathize so much with people who are in that situation, and I can help them get out there as well. So
Absolutely.
I specialized on people pleasing. I specialized on setting healthy boundaries, learning to say no, because those were all the things that I really had to learn. And I think people who know how to do that, they don't realize how hard it is for someone who has to still learn how to do that.
Yes.
And so many of us, we don't have any good idols for that. You know, we don't have any role models for setting healthy boundaries. I certainly didn't. And so I had to learn how to do that. And I have to become that role model for my clients. And so I'm
Yes.
constantly also still working on this and developing my skills in that field. That's why I coach people pleasers. Long story short.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing all of this. I just
Mhm.
love this is exactly the connection that we had the first time we talked. I
Mhm.
love that you really go in depth into things, and that we in already this first question, we already get so many, like I'm getting so many questions and things that I want to go even deeper
Mhm.
into. So let's imagine that someone is listening to us and they're wondering, do I actually have people pleasing tendencies or not? So how can we spot them? How can we see them inside of the couple, with their friends, at work?
Mhm.
What would you say? Okay, these are the typical behaviors. If you're people pleasing, you will probably do this with your
Mhm.
partner, with your friends, at work. How do we spot those
Yeah.
tendencies? Because the first step is awareness. So how do we become
Yes.
aware of this?
Such a good question. People pleasers are often stressed. They have very little time for themselves, but not just that, because this goes for, like, I don't know, so many people in this world. People pleasers are often resentful of people around them for not intuiting that they have crossed boundaries, because people pleasers have no ability to set boundaries. People pleasers don't know what they need, what their needs are. So they constantly feel like they are not getting their needs met. There's a lot of fear and anger and sadness in people pleasers, but they don't let it out with the person involved, because there's a lot of fear of conflict as well. And we're going to talk about why that is, and where that comes from. So basically, I would say, if you are stressed and feeling resentful at the same time, that's probably a very good indication that you should have a good look at your own needs and trying to get them met yourself and setting boundaries around that. Yeah. I think that's like the short version, or the essence, I would say. That's the essence.
Yes.
And how does it show up in our different kinds of relationships? So with friends, it can show up like, for example, very one-sided friendships. Maybe one have a friend who is very strong-willed. Maybe you, like I've had the tendency to have these very unique characters as friends, like very strong-willed, maybe sometimes a little dramatic people who were drawn to me because I was the empathetic listener and was able to hold space for them, because I did not need any space for myself, or so I thought, right? So very one-sided friendships, like not very much on eye level, or not feeling very balanced. So it can show up like one person always deciding when and where to meet, the other one, like the people pleaser, always denying their own preferences, for example. Just a very like everyday example would be the other person always decides you go eat, I don't know, Italian food the whole time, but maybe you really actually prefer Vietnamese food. I always bring this example because I love Vietnamese food so much.
Or maybe you're intolerant to gluten and they're saying, okay, let's eat pasta. And you're like, actually, no.
Exactly, right? So just having a preference and being able to voice that preference is something that a lot of people pleasers don't allow themselves. They don't allow themselves to have these needs, these preferences, these ideas for the friendship as well. Because we're gonna go much deeper in that as well. But basically, the underlying assumption is that I am not that important. It's, I'm not that important to have my own needs. Maybe I don't even have that many needs. So in friendships, it can really show up in these like very one-sided situations. In romantic relationships, of course, kind of similar, right? Many people pleasers are in relationships with people with narcissistic tendencies, because they are very strong on the outside, very strong-willed, very determined, etc. And so they need a partner who can adapt to that. And this can create this kind of like codependent behavior where the people pleaser accepts a lot of things from the person with narcissistic tendencies in order to make the relationship work. Because the worst thing that can happen for a people pleaser is for a relationship to break, or like for a connection to break. But it doesn't even have to be like a very toxic situation. It can also just be that one person is more aware in the relationship of like what they want, and they go for it, and the other person, the people pleaser, is less aware of what they want and need, and they kind of just like tag along. And sometimes that works for a really long time, until the people pleaser realizes, I am exploding. Like, I am stuffing down so many needs and feelings and wishes and like life goals. And I'm shutting all that down. And the truth is you can't. And at some point it will explode. So that's kind of the risk. But yeah, that can also just be an indicator of people pleasing if you feel like you are not really expressing yourself fully in that relationship. And then at work, of course, it shows up like being totally over committed with projects, being overly stressed about fitting everything in, making sure that everything works. It looks like having no boundaries around time, like sending emails in the middle of the night, replying to emails that you get in the middle of the night because you think you have to. It can look like always covering for other people when they are not delivering the work that they should be delivering, but you don't want them to get in trouble, so you are covering up for them. Yeah, these are just, some examples, but I think the work environment is where most of the stress comes from that people pleasers experience. Whereas in the relationships, there's more resentment, I think, that results from people pleasing.
Yes. So it's really interesting, this concept and what you said about the underlying assumption of I'm not that important. So in this friendship that we have, I'm not that important. So let's prioritize the other person's needs and timings and schedule. And my timing, my needs, my schedule, they will be in accordance to the other person. At work, it doesn't matter if I have too much. I'm not that important. So I'm going to do that extra project. I'm going to push to meet that deadline, even though I know that the consequences are harsh. In a couple, okay, if this person wants to travel to that place, let's do that place. Doesn't matter that I wanted to go to the mountains. Let's go to the sea. And I think sometimes, I don't know what you think about this, but sometimes, and I think of the moments when I've been a people pleaser, because I've also had those moments. And if I don't pay attention, sometimes they can still appear in new levels. Sometimes it's the feeling that you have, it's, I don't even have needs. I don't even have preferences.
Yeah.
So let's just do whatever you want. But the reality is, so you tend to tell yourself, I'm flexible. I'm good with anything. You choose. I'm good
I'm
with
easy.
anything. I'm easy. I'm flexible. So that's like the label
Yes.
or the lie.
Yes.
But the underlying reality is that I'm not even in touch with myself to realize what I want to eat or where I want to travel, or if I just want to rest tonight and don't do anything at all. I can't even access that wisdom inside of myself. So let's just do whatever you want. So it's like we have no power, no wisdom. I mean, it is there, but we're not accessing that power, that wisdom. So we are expecting the power, the wisdom, the responses from the outside world, because we've
Yes.
shut down our whole intuition, basically.
Yeah, that's beautiful the way you're describing that, because it highlights another layer that we haven't even talked about yet, which is the body and the importance of the body. Because of course we have needs. Everyone in the world has needs, and you will realize that when you go back to yourself as a little kid, as a baby. You were very aware of your needs, and you were very aware that you are allowed to make your needs known by crying. The only way you were able to make your needs known at the time was crying, right? But yeah, of course you have needs. And the body is the place where we can access those needs. It's not in our head. It's not an intellectual process. It's a process that needs to incorporate the body. Because, as I said before, a lot of stress and resentment results from people pleasing. And that's because we are suppressing, we are pressing down and like shutting off all these feelings that are showing us our needs. So that's something that I understood very late in my life, and I always want to bring this information to people, because I don't know that everyone knows about this. I think this is something we should learn in school. Like the feelings we have are indicators whether our needs are met or unmet. And I think that's such a logical thing to understand. But of course, we have to feel that in our body. So the body is where the feelings reside, right? We can feel the stress in our body. It shows up as like a heartbeat that's faster, and sweaty hands, or like blushing, or red blotches, from nervousness. And the resentment, for example, often shows up as like a knot in our stomach, or how do you say, like a closure in your throat, that you feel like you're going to start to cry, or tightness in your chest. But when you are in full people-pleasing mode, you don't even realize what your body is telling you. And it takes so much, reconnecting to your intuition and reconnecting to all those feelings to actually access your needs. And I always like to work with the body as the seat of the feelings, who are messengers for our needs. And that's just something you need to understand and then practice. But you can, and that's the beautiful thing, right? You can learn how to connect to your needs again. It's just that you have been disconnected for a very long time. And so it's easy to fall back into those patterns. Like you said, if you're not careful, you can fall back into those patterns very quickly. So it's something you need to practice over and over again.
And accessing that wisdom. What do I want? What do I need? Bringing the I a little bit forward and connecting with the I, spending time. I always like to say, when we want to meet someone, we want to get to know someone, for example, we want to maybe, date someone, and we want to get to know that person. We spend time with them. We ask questions. How are you doing? How are you feeling? What you like, what you don't like. But sometimes we're not educated to do the same thing with ourselves. So we're not spending time with ourselves. And that's why, at least for me, when I found meditation, I was like, that's my moment during the day when I get to connect. And how am I feeling? What do I need? What do I feel about this? And how can then respond to something that I'm feeling? But I take it as that time to access my own wisdom, spend time with my body, spend time with my heart, and then from that place make some shifts or set some boundaries if I need to. But if we don't have that moment just to listen to our bodies, like you were just saying, then we can't even access that wisdom to that, okay, communicate to other people, maybe set some boundaries. Then we get into another challenge, which is the fact that maybe we want to avoid conflict at all costs. And we're going to talk about that. But I'm very curious, from a psychological perspective, why does a person develop these people-pleasing tendencies? Because I don't think we are suppressing ourselves just to suppress ourselves. Something in our upbringing told us that maybe it wasn't the right thing to do. So what is actually happening that we've learned to suppress our needs, ourselves, our identities, in order to what happened?
Yeah, That's a very good question. And I think the way you just framed it in the end is the key to survive. So people pleasing is a fear-based response to a perceived threat. And what does that mean? It means that when we were little kids, we somehow got the impression that our connections to our caregivers, whoever they were, parents, grandparents, maybe also, I don't know, daycare teachers, whoever, that the connection to those people that we depended on to survive, because as little kids we are dependent on grown-ups giving us food, shelter, etc., that connection depended on us being adapted to whatever the caregivers need. So that can be maybe your parents had a divorce, like in my case, for example. My parents are very loving people, very, very cool people. I'm very lucky with my parents, but my parents had a divorce. And so in my child's mind, which is not logically developed yet, right? My dad was suddenly very much gone. Like he was not as present in my life anymore. And so I think what happened is that my little mind was saying, I better be a really good child, or otherwise my mom might leave too. Right. And that's not to say that my parents ever made me feel this way. I think this is just a dynamic that develops when the child has natural empathic tendencies. Like, you know, sensitivity is a spectrum, and there are some people who have a high sensitivity. I certainly am one of those people. And I have always tried to be mindful of my parents' feelings as well. And so, and my parents' needs as well. And so this is something, a dynamic that evolved. And in general, in psychology, people pleasing is seen as a response to a perceived threat of disconnection and as a you know, a way to try and make sure that your connections are stable. And we all know fight, flight, or freeze, right? The three main responses to a perceived threat. So either you go into attack mode, or you go forward. Flight, it means extracting yourself from the situation. And freeze means trying to not move, ignore everything, and just be in this kind of like shock freeze moment. And then there's also fawn, which is the fourth one, which is not as well known and not many people talk about it, but that's the people pleasing one. So it means that there's a fourth option for us to choose in moments of perceived threat, which is to adapt. We adapt to whatever we think is the threat. And yeah, so for people pleasers, that's like, I better not have big feelings. I better not have big needs, because if I do, then maybe I will be abandoned, and that can't happen. So in a child's mind, the grown-ups are always right. They have to be right, because otherwise you're lost. If you knew as a child that maybe your parents didn't handle a situation really well, that would not feel secure as well. So as a child, you tend to blame yourself, or to develop mechanisms that undermine your own identity, maybe, in order to survive, if you have these people-pleasing tendencies already.
And now that you're framing it in this way and we understand the cause, I can definitely see how it could have also developed, you know, for me. To share also a little bit of my story and also be vulnerable. My father, he was a very important engineer, so he was always working outside of our home because he always had projects. So he wasn't really present at home. And my mom was always there. So she was the one that was taking care of us, taking us to school, also working. She was like this super mom. So I had a very like, you know, secure attachment with my mom, and that was good. But then with my father, because he wasn't there, I developed this sense of abandonment. And I think a part of me, that little girl in me, said, okay, my dad is not here much, but if I want to be loved by him, then I'd better be perfect, and I'd better not ask for too much. So I was always the good girl who had the perfect grades, did everything perfect. So when he would come, I had like some good things to show, and then don't ask for much. So my needs weren't really with my dad. And with my mom, it was very different. She was always there for us. But with my dad, there was, I think, this feeling of my needs are not important because, you know, he's going to be too tired. Like, and I think later on that developed in my relationships with men, in which I was always there, always pleasing, always saying yes, always adapting to things. I also ended up at some point in a toxic relationship because that's the classic combo, an empath and a narcissist. It's like perfect combo for the narcissist.
It feels so good in the beginning because it feels like you found your perfect match.
And then it's hell.
Yes.
And then you're welcome into hell until you learn, you suffer, you learn, and then you decide that you are never going to repeat that ever again because being an empath, being sensitive, I believe it's a superpower. But if on the other side you have a person who's not attentive to your needs, it can be very complicated. But I think relating to the explanation that you give, the fact that, you know, maybe when we were children, it wasn't valid to have our needs, even understand which our needs met, communicate our needs. There was no space for it, or it wasn't safe. So it does make sense that then we learn, whatever. We learn to suppress our needs from a very young age. And then we are like, no, I don't even have needs. I'm good. I'm good with everything. I'm adaptable. But in reality, we did have needs all along. We weren't listening to those needs. So what are the benefits? Because I think our minds are very, very intelligent. So what are the costs and the benefits of being a people pleaser? Because there are benefits as well.
First of all, thank you so much for sharing your story as well. And that really touches me because I think there are so many people out there who would say, no, my parents were good. You know, they're still together. My parents were very nice, etc. And that doesn't mean though that it wouldn't have affected you the way that the situation, the circumstances were, right? So, you know, maybe some people would kind of resist the idea that they have any kind of problems whatsoever because of their parents. And I just want to say, this is not about blaming parents. And I think you did that also very beautiful. You just gave an explanation for, you know, the way that you might have perceived the situation as a little kid. So this is in no way to say that parents are at fault for everything that happens to you. Not at all. It's just to say that you make sense. So if you are a people pleaser, it makes sense. And whatever the reasons really are for that, you know, sometimes it matters because it just gives you an explanation and some people really need that. Sometimes it doesn't even matter because you can work on getting out of people pleasing even without realizing where it came from. But it just helps to realize, hey, I am not faulty. I'm not broken. Nothing is wrong with me. I make sense. And that's why I just wanted to highlight.
Yes.
Thank you for sharing your story as well. So the costs and the benefits of people pleasing. The benefits are that you feel like you have control over your connections. You feel like you have control over people not leaving you. You feel like you have control over how you are being perceived by other people, that other people will like you and will think highly of you. This can be in friendly romantic relationships or in work relationships as well, right? You don't want to get fired. You don't want to be perceived as someone difficult because, you know, beware of difficult women in our society. We are so often labeled as difficult when we're just being assertive, which is a whole other episode we could talk about. But that's my little feminist side there. But just to say, you know, it feels like people pleasing gives you a sense of control over connections. It also means you get to avoid conflicts. And that's a huge benefit for people pleasers because we have never learned how to do conflict well. We have probably grown up in an environment where we didn't have good role models for conflict because otherwise we would not be in this situation. We did not realize as people pleasers that conflict is necessary and can even be good. I used to think conflict is bad and must be avoided at all costs. And the costs were inside of me.
Mm-hmm.
So do you think that already answers the question of
Absolutely.
the benefits?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And of course, the other side of the coin is that this conflict that you don't play out on the outside, you internalize it. So the conflict is still there. The conflict is there are conflicting needs. Okay. One person always wants to eat something with gluten and the other one doesn't. But instead of, this is actually a great example. Instead of going into the conflict, even if it's just a silly thing like that, but it's not so silly because it feels unsafe to say, hey, can we maybe go somewhere where I can eat something without gluten? You eat that stuff anyways, and internally you then have the problems, right? They just stay with you inside of you. So I think that's actually a pretty good example. Eating something you don't actually feel like eating and then having to deal with it later. But it can also be, hey, I don't want to be difficult with my boss, so I will say yes to every project, every demand, because I just want to be a very good employee. And I really pride myself in being a good employee and being a good worker and delivering excellent quality.
It's
And
like being a good girl. It's
yeah.
another level of being a good girl, basically.
Yeah. Being a good girl, being a good employee, being a good girlfriend, a good wife, a good mother. It just goes on and on, right? Having these impossible standards to meet and at the cost of denying yourself your own needs and your own preferences and your own desires and goals. And I think at the very drastic end of the spectrum, denying yourself your own health and sanity, and you are risking burnout. And burnout, as we all know, it's not a physical thing. It might show up physically because you are unable to move at some point or something like that. But it's a mental thing first, right? It's just not being able to hold it anymore and not being able to juggle all the balls in the air anymore. And so you internalize the conflict that you don't want to that you want to avoid on the outside, and that just shows at some point. So the cost is really your own health, your own well-being, mentally and physically.
Absolutely. So let's imagine that a woman she has been able to listen to herself a little bit more lately. She has been able to spend some time with herself. She knows what she wants, what she needs. And then comes this second layer of the issue, which is, okay, now I know what I want. And that might not always be in line with what other people want. So how do we step up and say, I actually want this, or I actually in a table say, I don't agree with any of what you are saying. Like, I think you're just saying bullshit. And I think the complete opposite of that. So how do we go from, okay, knowing our needs, knowing what we want, and then actually stepping up, being authentic, being ourselves, setting boundaries? So how do we handle once the internal process is accomplished, which is already a whole challenge in and of itself, once we've mastered that bit or we're getting better at it, how do we then go into the external part of the issue?
I always recommend to start small and to maybe not, I love the example that you just gave of telling everyone at the meeting table that they're just speaking bullshit. Maybe that's not where you want to start because that will just feel very unsafe and very scary. And it might also not be how you really want to show up. I recommend to all my clients to start small. And start with something where there isn't, that you might have ignored at certain points because you didn't want to be fussy, or you wanted to be easy, right? So it doesn't matter that, I don't know, you asked for your dish without the parmesan, but you got it anyway. It was on top of your dish anyways, but you would then eat it anyways because you didn't want to be fussy, right? Send it back.
I feel so guilty with this one.
Yeah.
I feel so seen. I've had this, I didn't want it chicken, there's chicken, like, okay, whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
My
So
God.
you made a preference known, which is already a first step, right? So let's not discard that. That's already like a really, really good step to have made a preference known. But then if people don't meet that preference, how do you react then? Do you just accept that, or do you push back on that a little bit? And so I say start with something small like that doesn't involve like a lot of fear, because let's not forget that people pleasing is not something you do because it's fun. People pleasing is not something that you do because you don't know how to do otherwise. It is something that you do out of fear. And so let's not discard the fear. It's there and it's still going to be there. It is going to probably get smaller the more you realize and understand where it comes from and also how it shows up, etc. It is probably going to feel more manageable, but it is still going to be there. And so start small, take small steps towards the bigger no's. And for the bigger kind of interventions, I would always say have someone by your side who you can talk to about these things. And this can be like a really good friend, a coach, a therapist, whatever, like someone who will really make you not feel so alone in that big task. And this is already also like kind of like a revolutionary act for people pleasers, because usually we tend to not need anyone. We are the fixers and not the people who need to be fixed. We are the empathic listeners and not the ones talking. And so that already in itself is a revolutionary act, to ask for help with this and to accept help with this, and to realize that maybe this is a big step and that you don't want to take it alone.
Yes. And
do you think that would help someone if they heard this?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Start small. And my own experience with that was that when I started saying the first no's, first I was like a little bit, oh my God, and then once I started saying like no and respecting myself, and then another no and my needs, it felt so good. I felt so much power. I felt so much relieved that actually afterwards I just learned to love to, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to do that. Or I want to do this.
Yeah.
It started feeling really, really good. So it was a bit of a challenge in the beginning, but then I felt so powerful, so good that I was like, I'm going to say no the whole time just because now I love this. And then you learn to balance, we're not going to say no the whole time, but just to say that it does feel good.
Yeah.
When you finally honor who you are, what you want, what you need, and you're like, this is what I want and this is what I'm going to do. And that connection feels so good. It's such a relief when you've not been living like that for decades.
Yeah. And can I just say, what you just described is so powerful, because it describes that it is a feedback loop as well. We say no to something that feels small in the beginning, like rejecting some order that went wrong. It feels good to stand your ground, even with such a small thing. And then, as you said, the feeling grows. You grow more powerful. You grow because you realize, okay, if I say what I actually feel, I respect myself. I am respecting myself in this moment. So yeah, that kind of just, it's a feedback loop that feeds into your self-awareness, your self-respect, your confidence. The same is true for the other side of the coin. So the same is true for people pleasing. Every time you people please against your better knowledge and against your wishes and against your own needs, your self-respect diminishes because you know, okay, I should have said no, but I didn't. I couldn't. And that makes you feel smaller than you actually are. And it makes you feel bad about yourself. And so it's so beautiful to see this when this happens, like you described, like, oh, okay, I can say no. Wow, that felt good. And you can see the aliveness coming back. Right? Because every time we deny ourselves, like whatever we need, we diminish our own light. And that sounds very woo-woo and cliche, but like you begin to shine your light when you follow what is inside of you, right? When you express what is inside of you, you become much more alive. And so that's a beautiful thing to witness. And yeah, I just wanted to highlight this feedback loop because I think it's important to understand that it's a process and you can make some steps forward and some steps back. But keep in mind that if you continue down the path of people pleasing, although you know better, it just makes you feel smaller and smaller. And we don't want that. We need more people. We need more women to know their actual and their size and their beautiful light. And yeah, we don't need more people to shut themselves down.
Beautiful, beautiful. So I think this is a nice place to kind of close the conversation and say, I think the whole game is how can I say no maybe to the exterior and say yes to myself and say yes to my light and say yes to my power and allow myself to be fully me, to shine. Then whoever likes it will stay. If someone doesn't like it, they might go away, and that's okay. And I'm going to be safe because I'm not a child anymore who needs people for survival. I'm a full grown-up woman in my power. Whoever likes me stays. Whoever doesn't like me, that's okay. It's life. We can't please everybody because there's a huge cost.
I think you're saying so many important things there. Like, can I just highlight them again? Because I think it's so important to understand this people-pleasing tendency is a mechanism that you developed in childhood to survive, and you don't need it anymore. Because you are not, your survival doesn't depend on other people, caring for you. And it's exactly like you said, like you might, and this is something we haven't touched yet, but when you start setting boundaries, you might lose some of the connections that were dependent on you not having any boundaries. But and this might feel scary for some people listening. Let me just tell you, as someone who has been through that and who has lost her oldest friend, unfortunately, to this process, she's still alive, but to this process, it's a sad thing, and I'm grieving the loss of that friendship, but it was not a friendship that was making me feel good or alive, or that was making me feel seen or heard in any way. And this is not to blame her. Again, it's a dynamic that I'm very much at fault for as well. But our friendship did not survive my newfound love for my own needs and boundaries. And that's okay. And I am better for it.
Yes.
Because I was sacrificing too much of myself for that friendship. And yeah, so just if you are listening to this and you are wondering how certain friendships or relationships would survive if you started to say no, I just want to say to you, just ask yourself, do they really need to survive these friendships, these relationships? Is that really true? Are you really dependent on that? And of course it's sad, right, to lose a long relationship or friendship like that. But if you then feel more alive and better, then maybe it's okay. And you will find other connections that feel more like home.
And it is sad. I don't think we talk enough about the grief that we can have with certain relationships, especially friendships. We talk a lot about grief in romantic relationships, but we don't talk about the grief in friendships. And what I like to think in these cases is, if this relationship is based on me losing all of my power, on me being in a small little version that has no needs, this is not a relationship that it's interesting for me. If now that I'm in my full size, full power, full light, I know what I want, etc., etc., I'm going to voice these things out. If this relationship, some friendships will be able to adapt to that new version of you.
Absolutely.
And there will be compromises that will be made, and they're going to notice a change, but they will also be happy that you're, that you feel so good right now, and a compromise will be found, and you're going to feel at home with that relationship that has now evolved. But sometimes some relationships were based on you being small, on you not listening to yourself, on you saying yes every time. And now that you're not willing to do that, now that you're willing to also respect yourself, then the relationships fall apart. And some relationships can fall apart, and it hurts so much, so much.
Yeah.
But if we want to be fully ourselves, then it's like we need to upgrade, the way we're operating. And then the relationships that remain. The relationships that get lost, unfortunately, it hurts. They get lost. But we can also trust that maybe new relationships will come, that will be a match for the person that we are now, respecting ourselves, our boundaries. So there's kind of like this spring cleaning that happens, and it hurts a lot. And we can't diminish the pain that it's in that process of losing people that we deeply love. But I trust that the result at the end, with new friendships and new romantic relationships and a new drive in general, will be much better. And it's a drive that belongs with who we are right now that we're fully in our power. So the process hurts, but I think the result ends up in something really nice. So I don't know what you think, Stephanie, but I feel that we need to do a second episode on this topic.
Yes.
Because I was thinking the same. More than an hour, and we still have so many topics to cover. So if you agree here live, maybe we can plan to do another episode later on.
Absolutely. We have so much more to talk about. Yeah.
And we will expand on many of the topics that are so interesting, and we can go into depth. But I like to finish every episode with 3 questions, 3 rapid fire questions, and then letting people know where they can work with you and where they can find you in case they want to dive deeper into the people pleasing tendencies. So let me ask you the questions first. When was the last time you felt bliss?
The last time I felt bliss, probably this morning when my daughter woke up. She's 14 months old, and she's just, I don't know how to express like how much I love her, and how, I could cry now. Oh yeah, bliss for me was beautiful. this morning, like a very, just seeing her smile when she woke up.
So beautiful, so beautiful. Just exists, a little miracle that exists. The second one is, can you think of one idea that fundamentally changed your life?
So you might think it's people pleasing, but it started a little bit before that. One idea that changed my life was when my former boss at university told me, Stefanie, you are probably a highly sensitive person. And she gave me an idea of that this concept exists. And I had always known that I'm a sensitive person, and like very sensitive, but I didn't know that there was like research around that, and just diving into that in the process that I explained here with like the coaching that I received was so life-changing to realize that I'm a highly sensitive person. Everyone listening, if you have a tendency to think I'm just very sensitive, I encourage you to go online and to search HS person, and it's a website, and to take a test, an online test. Are you a highly sensitive person? And just to see how that makes you feel. It changed my life for sure. To see, because it was the first glimpse into like, I am not weird or broken or
weak,
so different or weak. Yeah, I'm not broken. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm just very highly sensitive, and that's okay. And there's like research, and you can learn more about it, and you can learn how to deal with it. So yeah, that was
And
probably the most
even I
life
think it's a superpower to be highly sensitive.
changing. Yeah,
Especially, for
yeah,
example, the work that we do, it's a
yeah,
superpower to be, extremely
yeah,
empathetic, feeling the other person. You were telling me
yeah,
about your child and I want to cry, but that also
yeah,
helps us, that also helps
yeah,
us deeply connect and deeply listen to the person that we have in
yeah,
front of us, because we're deeply
yeah,
feeling their
yeah,
pain, their joys, and we can deeply help them because of that high
yeah.
sensitivity. So
Yes,
I
but I would
believe,
say,
yes.
yeah, and I totally agree. It is a superpower, but you have to learn how to use it and not get overwhelmed by it. And so I think for the longest time in my life, I was scared of it and overwhelmed by it, and I didn't know how to manage it. And so learning more about it was so empowering because, like you said, now I know how amazing I can, like, coaching would not be possible without it, right? So I'm using it to my advantage and to so many people's benefits, but it was draining me before. So yeah.
Absolutely. And the third question is, if you could choose one rule that everybody in the world needs to obey, what would it be?
Learn more about yourself. And I don't mean like, and I think this goes for everyone. Like, be curious about yourself before blaming others, before starting wars, before, just like question yourself, but not in a critical, like more like in an understanding, empathetic, self-love kind of way. Like, what are you all about and what's going on with you? And start there. Yeah, I think that would really hugely benefit the world.
Absolutely.
And of course,
Absolutely
now that I
agree.
think about it, there's so much more that I want to say, like about sustainability and like living, not not in a way that hurts the world, etc. But yeah, I think that makes most sense now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So thank you so much for sharing all of your wisdom. I know we could spend 3 hours here. We would both be having an amazing time,
Let's.
and the listeners as well. So we're going to do definitely another show in the future. So where can listeners find you online if they want to learn more about people pleasing, if they want to even work on this topic? Where can they find you online?
Yeah, so I have a website, which you probably can link somewhere, stefaniegerke.coach, and you can just see how I present myself there. And if that speaks to you, you can sign up for my newsletter, which I love. It's a weekly gentle reminder to stay true to yourself and to continue on the learning journey path. And it's always with like very personal stories from me, because I'm still learning and I'm taking you along on that journey. And there's always an aha moment. So the newsletter is a really good way to stay in touch, and to get some gentle reminders. I'm also on LinkedIn and Instagram, but I would say the newsletter is where I truly shine.
Beautiful. I think I'm going to be joining that newsletter.
Yay!
Thanks, Stephanie, for coming into the show. It's been a true, true, true pleasure. I know when we had that first talk, we had a lovely connection intuitively. And now that we're here, it's like, of course, the intuition was right. It's always
I
right.
didn't even know that much time passed, it
It
just
went
flew
by
by.
so fast.
Yeah.
I think this is going to be one of the longest episodes. I do want to thank
Oops.
you for your time, for your wisdom. I want to thank Loreto, who will probably listen to the show, who introduced us, for putting us in
She's
contact and
amazing.
creating this
Yeah.
beautiful connection.
Yeah. She
So
had
thank
a
you so much for.
good intuition about this.
Yes, she also had a very good intuition. So thank you so much for your time, for your wisdom. And I will see the listeners on the next show. And in the meantime, in Blisstopia we trust.